I pulled a double shift on my anniversary and came home to an empty garage. My mom tossed me the keys to my brother's new car and said, "We sold yours." He offered a head start. Then she smirked. "Oh, and you'll be paying his tuition too. $6,000 by Monday." I just nodded, packed my stuff, left without a word. But before I closed the door, I dropped off one folder. This morning, my phone exploded. My aunt's threatening a lawsuit, my cousin screaming, and mom's trying to clarify it all to everyone. I, 29M, pulled a double shift on my anniversary and came home to find my girlfriend's car missing from our shared garage. The space where my Toyota Camry usually sat was empty, filled only by oil stains and the bitter taste of betrayal that was about to get so much worse. Mom stood in the kitchen doorway, dangling a set of keys like she was offering me a consolation prize. She told me they'd sold my car and that my younger brother had offered to give me a head start on finding new transportation. The keys belonged to his beat-up Honda that barely ran on good days. Then came the real punch. I'd be covering his college tuition too. $6,000 by Monday, she said with that familiar smirk that told me this had been planned. I should have exploded. Should have screamed about how I'd been working 60-hour weeks to help keep this family afloat since Dad died 3 years ago. Should have mentioned how my brother hadn't worked a day in his life while I'd been covering grocery bills and mortgage payments. Instead, I just nodded and headed upstairs to pack. The betrayal ran deeper than just the car. My girlfriend of 4 years had been in on it too. Her absence tonight wasn't coincidental. She'd taken her things and disappeared before I got home, probably knowing what I'd find. The anniversary dinner reservations I'd made seemed pathetic now, sitting confirmed in my email while I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. But I wasn't just packing my belongings. I was also gathering something else, a folder I'd been keeping in my desk drawer for the past 2 years. Insurance documents, bank statements, tax returns, and most importantly, the will that everyone assumed had been lost when Dad's lawyer moved offices. The will that showed the house wasn't just Mom's property, but had been left equally to all 3 of us kids. I discovered this 18 months ago when I'd needed Dad's social security number for something work-related. The new lawyer had been surprised that I didn't know about the inheritance, assuming Mom had already handled the transfer of deed. She hadn't. She'd been collecting rental income from the property Dad had left me and my sister, income that should have been split 3 ways for the past 3 years. There was more. Dad's life insurance policy had a clause that Mom never mentioned. If any of the beneficiaries were still dependents at the time of his death, their portion would be held in trust until they turned 25 or became financially independent. My brother had turned 25 6 months ago. His portion of the inheritance, nearly $40,000, had been sitting in an account that only Mom could access as the executor. The folder also contained copies of credit card statements showing Mom had been using my social security number to open accounts. Small amounts at first, just enough to fly under the radar, but it had grown to nearly $15,000 in debt attached to my name. She'd been paying the minimums to keep it from affecting my credit score immediately, but the damage was there. I made photocopies of everything before I left, keeping the originals for myself. Then I walked downstairs where Mom was already on the phone with my brother, probably celebrating their little scheme. I dropped the folder on the kitchen counter without a word and headed for the door. She called after me, asking what was in the folder, but I didn't turn around. I just told her she'd figure it out soon enough and left in my brother's piece of crap Honda that stalled twice before I made it to the end of our street. Update 1. I spent the night at a motel, using the time to make copies of everything and organize my evidence. By morning, I'd already been in contact with Dad's original lawyer, the one who drafted the will. He was very interested to hear that the property transfer had never been completed and that there might be some irregularities in how the estate had been handled. That's when my phone started going crazy. My aunt called first, screaming about how I was trying to destroy the family. Apparently, Mom had called her in a panic, spinning some story about how I was making false claims about Dad's will to try to steal the house. My aunt threatened to sue me for harassment and told me I was ungrateful for everything Mom had done for us since Dad died. Then my cousin called. She was furious because her mother was now involved in what she called my petty revenge scheme. She accused me of being jealous of my brother's success and trying to tear apart the family because I couldn't handle being the least favorite child. But the best call came from Mom herself. She was in full damage control mode, trying to explain to everyone that there had been a misunderstanding. She claimed the folder contained old documents that I'd misinterpreted, and that she'd been planning to tell me about my brother's tuition situation gradually. She even tried to say that selling my car had been my brother's idea as a way to help me build better credit by forcing me to take out a car loan. The thing about lies is that they require perfect coordination. When you're lying to multiple people about the same situation, everyone's story needs to match. Mom hadn't had time to coordinate with my brother, so when my sister called him directly to ask what was going on, his version of events didn't match Mom's at all. My sister lived across the country and had been largely uninvolved in family finances since Dad died. She'd trusted Mom to handle everything fairly. When she heard about the car and the tuition demand, she started asking questions that led to more questions. Questions about why she'd never received any inheritance documentation, why she'd never seen Dad's will, and why Mom seemed to be making unilateral decisions about family money. Update 2. The lawyer meeting was scheduled for the following week, but things escalated much faster than I'd expected. My sister flew in that weekend, and she brought her husband, who happened to be a forensic accountant. They wanted to see all the family financial records. Mom tried to delay, claiming she needed time to gather everything, but my sister wasn't having it. She reminded Mom that as an equal beneficiary of Dad's estate, she had every right to examine the financial records immediately. When Mom continued to stall, my sister threatened to involve the probate court. That's when everything started unraveling. The property taxes on the house hadn't been paid in 4 months. Mom had been using that money to cover my brother's expenses instead. The rental income from Dad's other property, the one I didn't even know existed until I saw the will, had been going into Mom's personal account for 3 years. My brother's new car, that he'd supposedly bought with his own money, purchased with funds from his inheritance account that he wasn't supposed to access. But the real bombshell came when my sister's husband started tracing the credit card accounts. Not only had Mom been using my social security number, she'd been using my sister's too. My sister had nearly $20,000 in debt attached to her name that she'd never authorized. My brother showed up during this financial excavation, and that's when I realized he'd known about at least some of it. He didn't seem surprised about the inheritance money or the property rentals. He did, however, seem shocked that Mom had been using my sister's identity for credit cards. Apparently, that wasn't part of their arrangement. The family meeting that followed was the kind of conversation that changes everything permanently. Mom tried to frame everything as temporary borrowing, claiming she'd been planning to pay everything back once my brother finished college and got a good job. She insisted that she'd only been trying to help him get ahead in life, the same way she'd helped me by letting me live at home rent-free. My sister pointed out that I hadn't been living rent-free. I'd been paying most of the household expenses while Mom collected rental income that should have been split between the 3 of us. My brother argued that he deserved the extra help because he was the youngest and needed more support to get started in life. Update 3. The legal consequences started falling into place quickly once we had all the documentation organized. The identity theft charges were the most serious. Using someone else's social security number to open credit accounts is a federal crime, regardless of family relationships. The estate mismanagement was a civil matter, but with potential criminal implications depending on how much money had been misappropriated. Mom hired a lawyer who tried to negotiate a family settlement to avoid criminal charges. The proposal was that she'd transfer the property deeds correctly, pay back all the fraudulent credit card debt, and distribute the inheritance funds according to Dad's actual will. In exchange, we wouldn't press charges for the identity theft. My sister was willing to consider it, but only if there was also a full financial audit to make sure we'd found everything. She didn't trust that we'd discovered the full extent of the financial manipulation. Her husband had already found 3 more credit accounts that we hadn't known about initially. My brother's position was interesting. He tried to play the victim, claiming that Mom had told him the inheritance money was his to use and that he'd never intended to defraud anyone. He offered to pay back the money over time, but wanted to keep the car and continue with college as planned. He seemed genuinely surprised that his actions might have legal consequences. The turning point came when the forensic audit revealed that Mom had also been claiming my sister and me as dependents on her tax returns for the past 3 years, despite the fact that we were both adults who filed our own taxes. She'd been getting tax credits and deductions that she wasn't entitled to, while we'd been missing out on credits we should have claimed. That discovery made it impossible to frame this as a family misunderstanding. This was systematic financial fraud that had been going on for years. The final straw was finding out that Mom had taken out a second mortgage on the family house using her authority as the executor of Dad's estate. She'd borrowed against property that belonged to all three of us to fund my brother's lifestyle and her own expenses. The house was now leveraged to the point where even if we sold it, there might not be enough equity left to give us our inheritance. Final update. The criminal charges were filed 3 weeks later. Mom was arrested for identity theft, tax fraud, and estate mismanagement. My brother was charged as an accessory for his role in using the inheritance funds he knew he wasn't entitled to. The house was placed in a trust pending resolution of the estate issues. My sister and I decided to sell the rental property to pay off the fraudulent credit card debt and legal fees. The family house would probably need to be sold too, given the second mortgage situation. 3 years of rental income that should have been distributed equally was gone, spent on my brother's college expenses and Mom's living costs. The family relationships were essentially over. My aunt and cousin blamed me for destroying everything by not just accepting the car sale and tuition payment quietly. They argued that I should have handled it privately instead of involving lawyers and law enforcement. According to them, I turned a family disagreement into a criminal matter out of spite. My brother lost his college funding and had to drop out to work full-time to pay legal fees. He maintained that he'd been manipulated by Mom and shouldn't face the same consequences she did. My sister disagreed. She pointed out that at 25, he was old enough to know that taking $40,000 he hadn't earned was wrong, regardless of what Mom told him. Mom's lawyer negotiated a plea deal that included restitution and probation instead of jail time, but only because my sister and I agreed to it. We decided that destroying her life completely wouldn't bring back the money or repair the family trust that had been broken. The revenge aspect wasn't in the dramatic confrontation or the legal consequences. It was in the quiet satisfaction of watching everything they thought they'd gotten away with unravel completely. They'd counted on my passivity, on my willingness to absorb whatever they threw at me, because I was the responsible one who wouldn't make waves. The folder I'd left on the kitchen counter contained 3 years of evidence that I'd been quietly collecting, not out of suspicion, but out of necessity when I'd needed documents for various purposes. I'd seen the inconsistencies and irregularities, but I'd given them the benefit of the doubt until the night they pushed too far. Now I drive a reliable used car that I bought with my own money, live in a small apartment across town, and have a credit report that's slowly recovering from the damage Mom caused. My sister and I maintain a relationship, bonded by the shared experience of discovering how extensively we'd been betrayed. The $6,000 they demanded for my brother's tuition turned into $60,000 in legal fees, restitution, and lost inheritance. The car they'd sold for quick cash cost them the house they'd been living in for free. The brother they'd prioritized lost his education and his relationship with both his siblings. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about letting people face the full consequences of choices they thought they'd never have to answer for. That folder on the kitchen counter wasn't just evidence. It was 3 years of their own decisions, carefully documented and ready to tell the story they thought they'd hidden forever.